Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the third in the series of There is Gold in the Welsh Valleys webinar, exploring how funding and finance provide the bedrock for growth and unlocking opportunity. Today's event is hosted by the CMI Wales Board. My name is Ellen, and I'm an events coordinator here at CMI, and I'll shortly be handing over to Kath, our panel host, to begin today's event. If you have any questions during the webinar, you can ask them using the live chat box on the right of your screen, and we shall answer as many as we can during the Q&A. Today's session is being recorded, and it will be shared with you later on today for those who booked to attend. The recording will also be available on the CMI YouTube channel and CMI website. Now over to Kath Austin, Chair of CMI Wales Board.
Thanks, Ellen. Hello, Quiso, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us this morning. Just a short intro to me. I'm, if you've heard from Ellen, the chair of the Welsh Board of Chartered Management Institute, and also the People and Marketing Director for Pete's Hut Restaurants in the UK. I'm personally fascinated about today's topic, funding and finance. It really keeps the wheels on the bus, and it really makes things happen and grow. And we're going to hear from some fantastic experts on our panel today about where we can go to get started, what we need to learn, and the sorts of attributes that we need to have as leaders to really power growth in business. So to welcome us to our panel sessions today, just before I introduce the panel, just a reminder that Chartered Management Institute is the only chartered professional body dedicated to promoting the highest standards of management and leadership excellence. The Welsh Board works across with businesses, big and small, education partners such as universities and colleges, really trying to raise the profile of management and leadership across Wales. And as we'll talk about a lot later, we've got lots and lots of small and growing businesses in Wales. And so making sure that we can access the skills and the development necessary to really power that growth is absolutely essential. And we're very passionate about that in CMI. During 2021, our series of Gold in the Welsh Valleys has been exploring the role of leadership in that growth and building the future of Wales. We've been talking to a number of academics, business leaders, subject matter experts, with each panel focusing on a key area that we think is a real enabler to business development. According to a lot of the people that we've spoken to, the entrepreneurial ecosystem is just critical, and the human capital workforce of that, we've explored that in detail. We've looked at domestic markets and accessible markets, so where is it that we can grow our business opportunities? And today is funding and finance, so how do we get the cash to actually make things happen? We also very recently had a supplementary webinar that's still available if you want to go see, with Prof Brian Morgan, which was fascinating deep dive into really what's that leadership mindset, what are the things and how do we need to think to really enable business. So today's session, we're going to be examining the pillar of funding and finance, and what we're going to be doing with some of the findings today and the previous sessions that we've been running is to build a manifesto to identify those key opportunity areas that can make a difference, those maybe gaps that we need to plug, and things that we think from a people and leadership perspective would really enable the future growth path of Wales. In terms of your role today, everybody that's watching this and participating, please do ask questions throughout the course of the session. If you put your questions into the chat function, then we will keep looking at them regularly and hopefully answering them for you as we go through the session. We've also got a couple of polls today, and before I actually introduce the panel, we're going to start with the first poll actually, just to establish kind of who we've got on the call today and sort of what your thinking is about finance and your experience of where to go to find it. So if you aren't an entrepreneur, if you work in a big business or a smaller business, or you work in a small startup, and you're thinking about the next steps, where would you go, or where have you gone to go get funding in Wales? So you can see the options down the side. We've got DevBank, Business Wales, savings, redundancy payments, other, specify in chat if there's something else, somewhere else you'd go to. We'll just leave it a few seconds. And you'll see in the comments there's a link to the polls. If you're wondering how to actually participate in the session, there's a link to actually get to the polls, which is ev.com/CMI events. So yeah, and it's on the ticker tape on the bottom there. So please do join in. So we've got a few more people logging on to the poll now. So we're seeing a bit of movement on the results there. We've got 50%. A lot of people saying it's coming from their savings. We've got Denise saying the Chamber of Commerce, local business school at uni. She's coming from there. We've got greetings from Lagos. We've got people from all over the world joining, which is fantastic. Thank you very much for joining us today. Brilliant. So any of you that have filled in the poll that put other, please put in the chat where. It would just be interesting to get a sense of that. So we've got something from Steve there saying savings, credit cards, remortgaging. So again, really kind of looking at how you can get some equity out of assets that you might already have. Okay, well, that's interesting. NHS funding, that's interesting, Lucy. We'll have to explore that maybe a bit later. Savings, that's coming up a lot. Okay, well, we'll leave the poll there. I'm now going to introduce you to our experts and get their commentary on that poll, and if there's anything in there that surprised them. So firstly, I'd like to introduce Richard Scott. Richard's going to give us a bit more information about his career background and what's brought him here today. But Richard is the relatively recently appointed director for Global Welsh Invest. And that's a great organisation, sort of connecting up great ideas and people with sources of funding. So very much in keeping with our theme today of how we access that money to really help grow. And also I'd like to thank Richard, because Global Welsh also partnering with our event today, so also helping us to host the session. So thank you very much, Richard, for that. So Richard, tell us a bit more then. So what brought you in life to what you do now?
Oh, thank you very much, Kath, for a nice warm introduction. So yeah, as you said, I've worked for Global Welsh for a relatively short time. I'm just going into my 4th month. Global Welsh is a community interest company. It's a not-for-profit, and it seeks to leverage the power of the Welsh diaspora. And the very first thing I learned when I joined Global Welsh was a new word, and that was diaspora. And it's interesting that everybody I speak to since, sometimes you find that most people don't know what the diaspora is. So it might be worth for the audience just very briefly explaining what the Welsh diaspora is. Diaspora is sort of any person that leaves home, in our case, home being Wales, in order to achieve business or personal success. These people who leave Wales and achieve success generally have an affinity with Wales and a propensity to want to give something back. And generally what they're able to give back is either money through funding of businesses, or experience, or access to the network, or other aspects of support. So Global Welsh was set up to try to leverage the power of the Welsh diaspora for the benefits of Welsh businesses. I've also been an entrepreneur, as you've said. So I started my first business in 1996, which feels like several lifetimes ago now, and I've learned a lot about failure and success during that period. I've run 2 businesses. My first one ran out of money, and learned a lot of lessons during that process. I think fortunately my second one was a lot more successful. I managed to start it, scale it, and eventually sell it to a US technology company. My business worked with technology. We were developing mobile applications for the construction technology space. And we were delivering digital tools that the people with the hard hats and the muddy boots on construction sites were using on a day-to-day basis. I've also had an experience of burnout and a prolonged period of poor mental health, which was quite a surprise. But I tried to learn from everything. So I've subsequently become a very passionate mental health advocate. And I want to help entrepreneurs build healthy and sustainable businesses. On the point about the poll, I was really surprised actually that there was nobody voted for Business Wales, which was quite interesting. I think, you know, in my experience, I've met with Business Wales recently, and you know, as a gateway to access various services and forms of support for businesses, both financial support and soft skills and management, and generally just as a direction, you know, a place where you can go, where you can get an understanding of the landscape and where you can go for various aspects of business support, whether it be funding or, you know, other types of skills. You know, they're a really great organization, and they've got some really great people in there. So I was quite surprised about that in the poll, and it's quite interesting to see that.
We'll come back to that in a minute, because it is interesting, isn't it? And I'm just going to bring in now Professor Dylan Jones-Evans, and can we call you Dylan?
Of course.
Great, thank you.
Any less.
And again, Dylan, you've had an amazing career path, and you're doing some wonderful things now in Wales, really promoting small businesses, startup businesses, including the awards, which sounded like they were incredibly successful a short time ago. So if you'd like to tell our audience a little bit more about yourself, and again, what got you to here, that would be great.
Well, as I'm from North Wales, I can probably talk for the next 2 hours about myself, so I'll keep it succinct. So my name's Dylan Jones-Evans. I'm currently Professor of Entrepreneurship at the University of South Wales and Assistant Pro Vice Chancellor, which is a posh title for being responsible for entrepreneurship at the university. I've been a Professor of Entrepreneurship for 25 years this year. And when we started off, of course, there were very few people who were interested in startups back then. In 1996, particularly when I came back to Wales to do this. Since then, obviously, there's been more and more interest, particularly over the last few years. And I think it's what I've tried to do throughout my career is trying to get that message across of the importance of startups and growing businesses, particularly Welsh businesses, to the economy of Wales. And, you know, sometimes I've been successful, sometimes I've not. One of the things I did 6 years ago was to do a review for the Welsh government on the problems of access to finance for small businesses. And that led to a panel that I chaired that came up with the idea of creating a development bank for Wales. It's funny enough, they've called it Development Bank of Wales now. I always thought a development bank should be for Wales, not of Wales, but let's put those semantics to one side for now. But clearly, you know, that access to finance was recognised 7 years ago. As the panel is going to be discussing today, it's still a major issue for startup and scale-up businesses, and I think that is at the crux of many of the challenges we find here in the economy. In terms of other things I do, as you mentioned, I've been running something called the Wales Fast Growth 50 for 23 years. Recognised as the fastest growing companies in Wales. It was part of this mission to show that we have brilliant Welsh businesses as good as any other part of the UK. And we've just we've just recognised and identified the 50 fastest growing companies for this year. And even with the back end of that measurement being in the year when COVID started, 2020, the 50 companies will have grown by nearly 350 million in turnover, an average growth of 135%. So even in times of great economic challenges, we have some great businesses here in Wales. And one other thing, all that stuff is great, but probably the thing I'm proudest of doing is actually getting a star for Richard Burton on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. That would take another hour to talk about. So let's get on to the subject.
Well done you. Very well deserved. And brilliant. Thank you very much. And lastly, we've got Sally. And Sally is one of my colleagues on the CMI board. And Sally also very bravely, a couple of years back, set up her own business. So it's been a quite recent example in it, having personal experience of going through those moments in time of having to find funding and having to make the big leap decisions to leave a corporate role and actually start your own business up. So Sally, welcome.
Thank you, Kath. And it's quite strange actually being on this side of the table for this event. I'm usually the one either hosting or supporting the host. So thank you for having me. Yeah, I'm struggling actually whether to introduce myself as an entrepreneur, as a business owner. For those of you who joined us with Professor Brian Morgan last time, there was this real differentiation between entrepreneurial skills and that, and bringing a new product to market, bringing a new idea to market, or somebody who is brave in Catsfield and just goes and sets up their own business. So I'm not sure which of the camps I fall in, and actually it'll be really good to explore some of that today with our panel members about what their thoughts are around entrepreneurship. Dylan, really interested in what you were saying there in terms of startup and the support for startups, and I found it really, really tough. I set my business up 3 years ago and it was going really well. I was doing consultancy, I was travelling quite a lot and quite comfortable with travelling. And of course, with COVID hitting, like many other businesses, my business was affected. So I took the opportunity to pivot, invested in a training school, which I'm really proud of, but it's a whole new skill set and perhaps one I wasn't properly equipped for, and just didn't know where to find the information that I really needed or the support I needed.
So Sally, when Richard mentioned he was quite surprised by our first poll in respect to the fact that the Development Bank didn't come up as a clear winner or a clear option in there, what was your view, sort of being someone actually looking for funding? Were you surprised by the results there?
I really was. I mean, to be honest, and again, Richard's mentioned Business Wales there. I have had nothing to do with Business Wales at all, which is really interesting. I've been running my own business for 3 years. And as I said, in the latter 6 months, I've really had to change how my business is operating. For me, finding finance absolutely happened by accident, as you do, in a pub with somebody who happened to work for the Development Bank of Wales. And she said, have you thought about this? To that point, I'd self-funded my entire business. So I'd been quite fortunate. I'd done okay for 2 years, despite going through COVID. I had a significant amount of money I was about to invest in an office premises, and then founded a training school, fell in love with it, and was never on my business plan, to be honest, to have a business school, but here I am running a training centre, and it is the right move for me. I know it is, but obviously I found the funding to do that through a friend in a pub.
Yeah, I mean, that seemed to be something that came out from the poll, actually, in that savings, so potentially kind of completely going on your own, seemed to be the most popular result from this morning's poll, actually. So yeah, there's probably lots of people in a similar position to you, Sally, out there watching now, actually. So thank you for that. So I just want to sort of start going right to the heart of obviously the area that we're particularly interested in around leadership capability and management capability and the role that plays in growing business. And we heard from the recent interview with Professor Brian Morgan about what he described as the critical attributes of a leader mindset. He talked about self-reliance, belief, adaptability, and sort of, again, starting with Richard, are you seeing these attributes, or what other things do you see in people that are coming forward and making that leap to start their own business and to seek funding?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think, first of all, when I over the last sort of 4 months, I've been trying to engage with quite a lot of young businesses, startups, and scale-ups. And the first thing that I want to really understand is the story of the founder. And really get under the skin of that person and understand what motivates them, what their vision is, and what their expectations are. It's really to understand the character of that person, and whether they have the kind of curiosity that's going to lead them to sort of success. Other attributes, leadership attributes, which I think are absolutely critical at this stage. And it's really important as well, because you need to be able to convince an investor of you and your ability to lead an organization forward to success. So you need to be able to communicate very effectively and very succinctly. I think you need to have a certain capability to inspire and lead. And the other thing for me is, do you have a real clear understanding of the marketplace that you want to sell into, and not just the people who are going to consume your product, but also the people who are going to buy your product. And often these are quite different. Okay, in some cases they are the same people, right? If you look at something like a sandwich shop, right, the consumer and the buyer are the same person, and the transaction happens, and everything happens very quickly. But in bigger organizations, and as you start to scale, the consumer of your product, the person who actually uses it, could be very different to the person who actually buys it, and they've got different needs and different requirements to fill within their organization as well. So it's a real clear understanding of why you're creating this product and how it's going to create some benefit to the market that you go into and the users who are going to consume your product too. I think humility is also a really important factor in a leader. Understanding that you can't do everything yourself. I've been guilty of this. In my early days, I felt that I could do everything. I could turn my hand to marketing and to finance. I was never very good at finance, but I could try to turn my hand to finance and sales and strategy. And you think, okay, I own this business. I'm going to do everything. At the very start, sometimes that is the case. But understanding that as you grow, the ability to bring in people who are going to support you, who have more experience than you, who are more intelligent than you in many instances is actually a really good thing. So humility is really important as well. So for me, it's about the character of the person, the understanding of the marketplace, and a certain degree of humility and understanding that you need great people around you, and some of these people could be much better than you, right? In certain fields, and that's a great thing. CEO is one job in my view, to hire great people and to keep the business funded.
I completely agree, and I think, Richard, alongside that comes bravery. It is that being brave enough to ask. So I listen to Les Brown actually quite a lot, and he says about don't be afraid, don't be afraid to ask somebody else. And I think that's what you're saying, isn't it? And for me, it was that vulnerability, being in a pub, saying to my friend about, I'm not sure where my business is going, I'm worried, I've had the impact of, I've got to do something different, and showing that vulnerability actually come up with the answers for me.
Do you know what? So it's really interesting as well, because again, when you do talk to a lot of young startups, I'm involved in a few small businesses in West Wales, and it's almost that pride of not wanting to be seen to fail, or not, that pride of I can do everything. That point that you made, Richard, about not wanting to give over to the next generation, or to really recognise where the gaps might be. And I think sometimes the challenge of that is you don't know what you don't know. So if you've come out of school or college and you've gone straight into setting up your own business of some sort, and maybe you haven't had exposure to working in a big company or some of those other things, you kind of only know your own experience, don't you? So it is really vital at that point to seek advice, isn't it? And be open to that advice and listen to it and sort of really sort of say be very open to new experiences. I think you use the term curiosity. And I think curiosity seems to be a very, very vital attribute for anybody in business, really. But sort of exploring that a bit further. So, Dylan, coming to you, obviously you've had great insight into the businesses that are making that transition. They're growing fast. They're getting into the top 50. Sort of building on that, what are you seeing in those businesses from a people capability perspective, which is enabling them to do that good stuff?
And just building on what Richard just said, it's something we recognised many years ago in academia when we started looking at obviously growing companies. It was something called founder's disease, and it sounds horrible, but it's essentially this problem that many founders have of letting go and actually delegating to others within their organisation. The point Richard made, where many entrepreneurs think they have to do everything. And it is all about that transition from, shall we say, the technical role, be it if you're a scientist starting a business or a chef starting a business, to actually then managing people, that managerial role, and then moving to that more strategic role where you're working on the business rather than in the business. And what we've seen, and every year we look at what are the key success factors, and when we see winning companies coming up to accept their award at the annual Fast Grow 50 awards event, and the first thing every single one of them says, I'd like to thank the team behind me. I'd like to thank the team that made this company successful. We hear all the others, no I in team and all this, but it is really true. It is really about the team that the successful entrepreneur builds around them, that enables them to make the best of themselves rather than working on the nitty-gritty in the business, and also to add those particular strengths and competencies that add real value to the business going forward. And that's what we see, time and time again those are the businesses that are successful, are those that are enabled to make that transition as an individual, as the business grows. Because remember, as the business grows, it's really odd. It's things like systems that become more important, and the role of the entrepreneur actually becomes less important to the success of the business. But the entrepreneur can actually look for new opportunities to take the business in a further direction.
I think in terms of learning points from today's session, there's a phrase there I just want to repeat back, which I thought was brilliant. So absolute gold nugget there. So sort of working on the business, not in the business.
Yeah.
And that really sort of encapsulates that step, doesn't it? From starting out and whatever it is that you might be doing, whatever product you might be making, sort of in the nitty gritty of doing that, making that thing, to actually looking at the business and stepping out from actually doing the do to be able to grow it.
I mean, we all do it, right? I'm a chairman. You could call me a non-executive chairman, but considering I do work as well with the company, so I'm chairman of a company that's grown to, in the last, we're celebrating 4 years next month. We've grown to employ 30 people during COVID in a space in basically a market that is co-working, which is supposed to be dead. And what I have found, as you know, and we had our session recently with all our new team, and you know, they asked me what my job is as chairman, and actually is to try and get the CEO and the COO to take that step away from doing what they were doing 2 years ago, which is actually doing all the stuff, you know, that now they're employing other people to do, and to think more strategically. Because if we don't think more strategically as a business, we're not going to grow, take on more people, create wealth in the economy, and support our community that we're working in. So I think that's really critical, that, you know, that an entrepreneur can actually move slowly through their sort of life cycle and to become very much a more strategic person that overlooks the business.
So that very much that adaptability. So just to do a playback there, I've heard from Richard, Sally, Dylan, very much around sort of being humble enough to seek opinions from others and be open to learning and things that might contradict your own ideas. Being curious, open to learn, very adaptable. And I'm just having a quick look at the comments now. We've got a few really interesting comments in there. So Neil Reynolds, entrepreneurs who grow as leaders almost always scale because they're open to learning. Key attributes, motivation. Absolutely motivation. None of this will have an impact if leaders don't have that hunger to expand. So I'm using the word hunger there, I put that one in, but it's often something that gets mentioned, isn't it? That sometimes businesses, they get to a comfortable stage, and then, you know, if there's not some sort of change point, then they can pretty much stay there. So that sort of hunger for the next step.
Kath, can I ask a question, if I may, of my other panelists, if you like? You know, I think having been in the being now and the doing, you know, I was successful in securing a Development Bank of Wales loan, and that's been really good for me. I think perhaps where I'm struggling now is moving into the cash flow management side of things. So, Richard, I'm sure, as you said, you're almost in a mentor role in some ways as well, having run two, and one in particular, hugely successful business yourself. You know, do you find this a lot with the people that you're supporting and mentoring?
With regards to sort of transition into doing jobs that aren't what they would naturally do, or trying to develop new skills, like as you talk about.
I think it's a new skill. I think it's a new finance skill. So as you said earlier, you know, finance has not been a strength of yours. It certainly wasn't one of mine either. You know, I was advising people on how to use kind of their business through their people to generate more money, as opposed to actually handling the money myself in my previous role. So whereas I learned a whole new skill around, as you said, pitching to an investor, pitching my idea and my forecasting my business plan for the next 5 years, and did that quite successfully. Where I'm 4 months into my business now, and it's just remembering to keep reserves to manage the payroll, keep reserves for those unexpected bills that come in. And I'm finding now this is a whole new skill set. And you do still get those, you know, that book about the chimp paradox, you still get those mindset gremlins coming in going, no, you can't do this. Who do you think you are? So it's just a question, I think, to both of you about how you make that transition from the initial pitch and the request for funding and the bravery and all those leadership mindsets things we talked about to, as Dylan said earlier, they're working on in your business now, working on your business.
I think when you get to that point where you're asking those types of questions, Sally, it's exactly the right time to go and reach out to the ecosystem and the support systems within Wales. You know, as I said earlier on, I was surprised that Business Wales wasn't identified in the poll. You know, a conversation with one of their representatives and helping them understand where you feel that you've got your weaknesses or where you need to improve. You know, they can give you the right kind of signposts and direct you to the right kind of people that can help you with regards to those skills. And some of these things are available free of charge as well, right? So, you know, so it's not necessarily going to be a significant cost. So as I said, you know, be curious, ask the questions. You know, don't be afraid to I don't know, expose some aspect of your skill set that you consider to be a little bit weaker, right? It's not an issue. You know, fail fast and then go and find a way to fix it.
Yeah. I think that's another quote, isn't it? Fail fast and look for success.
Yeah, Dylan, sorry, you wanted to come in then?
Yeah, very quickly. I'm intrigued by, you know, the focus of this, because with all due respect to DevBank, the amount of funding they provide to business in Wales is dwarfed by the high street banks. And you didn't even ask that question about where do you get your funding from. And, you know, the real issue here, I think, is how do you for example, you know, if you think about it, most of the banks now, they have made a commitment. NatWest made a massive commitment recently to provide more funding for small businesses. That comes with, with the issues of that's usually guaranteed. But to be fair, nearly all of the Development Bank of Wales's funding is also attached to a personal guarantee. So, you know, that's one area. Let's look to the private sector, first of all, before looking to the public sector. And the same with advice. You know, Business Wales has been set up, but we have accountants, we have lawyers, we have a massive set of private sector advisors that are good, if not better, than some of the advisors in the public sector. So if you want to talk about finance, go and talk to your accountant. I would assume they would know what they're talking about. Mm-hmm. And I would assume that they're the people that could help you. And remember, this is one of the challenges that you have with accountants. Most small businesses treat accountants as auditors. They basically, the month before the annual accounts supposed to be in, they go there with a box of receipts, put it on their desk and say, sort it out. But accountants are and should be also financial advisors to businesses, but you've got to ask. Because they're normal sort of, you know, we treat them, and I'm exactly the same. I'm terrible about putting my accounts into my accountant, but, you know, we do treat them very much as auditors rather than as advisors. And if we can move that, then all of a sudden you've created an army of financial advisors all over Wales that can actually help you with your business.
You can easily access. Yeah, it's a brilliant point. Yeah, really.
And what's really interesting about that actually is it goes back to something you said earlier, Kath. You don't know what you don't know. That's almost come as new news to me. You know, I thought my accountant was there just as an auditor. And I'm sure there's other people listening to this podcast who will be thinking the same way. It constantly comes back to you don't know what you don't know. And that's the power of these panels and these events, isn't it? That we can learn from experts who've been there and done it. And will say, go back and have that conversation.
And the same with law companies. You know, I work with law companies all the time. Some of the advice that they give is as good, if not better, than you'd get from, you know, professional advisors in other fields. So again, you know, look more widely. It's there. You just got to go knock on their door.
Dylan, just with your educational background now, going back to the start again briefly. On this call, you know, Sally's volunteered that, you know, finance wasn't her strongest point, and, you know, an area that she's having to learn and grow and understand cash flow management, all that good stuff. I don't know about you, but I'm an avid watcher of Dragon's Den. And the thing where it always comes a cropper is the individual pitching their idea doesn't really understand the difference between turnover and profit, you know, really basic stuff. And, you know, I always watch it and think, well, have you never watched this program before? Or, you know, have you never really thought about your business and how you're actually going to make money at the end of it? And you think, you know, where in the education system should there be some basic finance training? You know, should it come way early? You know, what's your thoughts on that?
Well, obviously, I think personal finance should be something that should be taught from primary school in the simplest way possible. Managing money is a life skill. It's not a business skill. And we see some of the challenges that we have now in society could be because of some of the issues related to that. So in terms of that sort of, that sort of skill, in terms of personal skills, yes, it is a life skill. It should be taught as a life skill in primary, secondary, and onwards. In terms of finance, in terms of business, it still surprises me. We're in the process now of, we've got our MBA students who have taken an enterprise option, and they're writing business plans. And it really having to drive home this whole idea that if you do not get the finance right for your business, even from you to understand it, never mind, potential investor, then the rest just falls down. It is the foundation of everything. Because, we talked about this whole, I could be guilty of this in saying, the fast growth 50 is based on increase in turnover. But, turnover is vanity, profit is sanity, and cash is king. And having that cash and understanding that it doesn't really matter. If you can't pay your bills at the end of the month, your business is going to close. And trying to get that across, in a postgraduate course that is based on applying theory into practice. And I'm trying to apply this whole idea of finance and how to read a balance sheet and how to put your profit and loss account together and how to generate, estimate your turnover. But in the end, practicality of that is, if you don't have the cash, you don't have a business.
Yeah. And it's kind of seeing finance as your friend, isn't it? Because again, it can get into that bucket of a bit scary, I'll avoid it, I'll only worry about it when I'm going to put my accounts in, all that kind of good stuff. But if you're really passionate about something, if you want to really make something happen and develop a new product, or you're creative and want to run a gallery or whatever it might be, you've got to get the financing right, haven't you? Finance has to be your friend. You've got to get cheapest access to cash you possibly can, and see that as a positive thing. And one of the things I've seen actually is people are almost ashamed to make money. There seems to be the sort of thing that profit is slightly shameful. And surely that's a bit mad, isn't it? Because you need money to grow and create opportunity and create jobs and all these good things. Richard, have you seen that? Have you seen sort of people being slightly sort of worried about talking about turnover, profit, actually being a bit almost shy about it?
No, is the answer to that. Certainly not in my experience. No, I think it's really important to go back to that point about the way that you raise the finances, though, because there is seems to be in some cases a lack of fundamental knowledge. The difference between equity and debt and so on. I know Deaf Bank Wales have been running programs to try to help people understand these fundamental differences, right? Between equity and debt, and and there's a lot more other combinations of debt and equity as well that can be used to create a funding package. So no, I haven't seen any issues where people are sort of embarrassed to talk about.
It came up. Maybe it's the wrong word. It came up in a previous panel around this almost like tall poppy syndrome. So it's sort of like that thing where you get to a level of success and you kind of don't want to be too sort of put your head above the parapet, and it came up. I think was it with Professor Brian as well, about the sort of almost the sort of Welsh cultural humility about not wanting to go there. I don't know, Sally, have you got a thought on that?
Yeah, I think it did. I think where you're coming from, Kath, is a value of what your time is worth, because sometimes, it's that pricing model of your product. I mean, I went through an entrepreneur program earlier this year with another 24 entrepreneurs, and you quite often among that team, there was a few who would say, I'm not sure to price it at that amount. I'm not sure my time is worth that yet, because they hadn't experienced that success yet and they didn't realise the value of who they were. And it's something, and I'm almost embarrassed to share this, but it has stuck with me. Somebody actually challenged me around it and said, you wouldn't pay £30 for a pair of Louboutins. And actually that really stuck with me. So if you're going to buy really expensive shoes, you buy them because you recognise them as quality, you recognise them as a brand, and you pay for that, and you're comfortable to pay for that service. So I think there is some mindset monkeys around valuing the importance of your product, valuing the importance of your time, but also recognising all those other things that go into it. So, for some of the entrepreneurs that I was working with at that time, they would say, right, okay, but I'm doing a makeover session and it's just an hour. And then you're having a conversation with them. What about the 20 years you've spent crafting your trade? You are actually selling that for an hour because you've got this level of experience. Because if they weren't buying you, they would have just done that themselves in an hour. I'm not explaining it very well, but you can see where I'm coming from, really. It is, I think, that mindset about the worth. It's maybe that.
Yeah, I mean, perhaps potentially in your area as well, Sally, where you're sort of selling knowledge, aren't you? So it's that, you know, making sure that your rates are right and sort of, you know, feeling comfortable with putting them up based on whatever. And yeah, it's interesting. But okay, so just sort of moving on, there's a couple of really interesting bits in the chat I just want to pick up on. So there's a comment from Erica, which is quite interesting. She's just completed her MBA. The finance module made it all feel too complicated. So Richard, is it complicated, or is actually business quite straightforward?
As I said earlier on, finance wasn't really my strength, right? And as Dylan said, I would take a lot of advice from my accountant. I think in some ways it really depends on where your perspective is. For me, I'm very much a customer centric person. I build everything from the perspective of the customer out. You know, I think Steve Jobs said some time ago, when you're building a product, you start from the user experience and you work outwards. Now, I'm not trying to dodge the question there. Basically what I'm saying is, I think if you focus on your product and the service and the value, and you understand the market and your buyers, and you can constantly try to evolve your proposition so that you're always matching what the customer and market need is to what you're providing. The finances almost look after themselves in some ways, right? You can hand those off to your accountant. You can hand those off to the people that deal with it. You're generating value. I think as a leader, as an entrepreneur, focus on the value that you're generating and the customers that you're dealing with and the acquisition of customers, and if you struggle with the finances and you're not naturally able to pick up a balance sheet and read into read an insight into the business, then that's okay. All right, you can have people around you within your team or within your professional advisor circle that can and give you those kinds of answers. So for me, focus, be customer centric, focus on your product and generating value, and leave the rest of the stuff to work itself out. So
Richard and Dylan, so what's stopping us in Wales? So, if this statistic's probably not exactly right, because I think it's about 2019, but it's about 95% of businesses are micro businesses in Wales, so employing sort of 0 to 9 people, that kind of area. What's stopping us growing those to SME, big businesses, and moving them through that chain? So again, Dylan, you're starting with you, and you're seeing some of those businesses that are faster growing. Again, what's stopping all those thousands of other businesses from taking that step?
Well, it's always you're going back about 30, 40 years looking. It's always about 5% of businesses that create about 50, 60% of new jobs. That's always going to be the same. And, many businesses make that decision not to grow. And we've seen this, you'd reach a certain threshold. So a business will grow and it might be hitting a turnover of about 3 million. Now that's generating a really nice lifestyle for the owner manager. They've handed it over to other people. So they're not even, on the business or in the business anymore. And that business is being managed for the benefit of the owner manager. And it just keeps on doing, keeps on growing very slowly, generating the sort of income that they want. So when you get to that stage, it's very difficult when you've got a Porsche in the drive, a nice house in the countryside, a villa in Mallorca, and your kids go to private school. Why would you want to work any harder? So, the point was made earlier about motivation. So it's how do you motivate this? Because a lot of the businesses that I know that are turning over 3 million with those entrepreneurs could be running 30, 40, 100 million pound businesses. They're perfectly capable of doing it. It's just that motivation, how to take that. Now, the way to do that, in my opinion, is that, and we haven't mentioned this yet, is about these peer-to-peer networks. And now what that means, sorry to use another academic term, it's basically about getting owner managers and entrepreneurs together in a room so they share experiences. And it's very easy for me as an academic to say this is what should be happening. But when you listen to other people who have been successful, then all of a sudden, if you're feeling not motivated and you're talking to somebody saying, my God, they built a £30 million business. I can do that. My business isn't any different to theirs. So we do fail, I think, to that extent. Again, it's something I've been trying to do, trying to persuade the Welsh government, the city regions. You come up with all these highfalutin schemes that, focus on sectors like every other part of the UK. Just get your entrepreneurs together, get your business owner managers together, and get them with their experience and expertise to share, what they want to do and to stimulate and encourage themselves. I'll tell you, that would have a massive effect on the Welsh economy, far more than, these multi-million pound initiatives. I coined this phrase initiative-itis 30 years ago when I was working with the Welsh Development Agency. And it is, can we come up with another initiative? Forget that. Just get the business people in a room, get them to talk to each other, and that's how we develop, the future of the Welsh economy.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Actually, connectivity, isn't it, and networking and
collaboration.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, just sort of doing a bit of research because we're looking to create a manifesto just to identify from a people leadership perspective some of the key areas that would make the biggest difference. Actually connecting, networking. I think your peer group idea, Dylan, is probably one of those key potential solutions that's actually not that difficult to solve.
Yeah, and it's relatively easy to do.
Mm-hmm. And actually, Kath, it might be worth just saying here, the CMI do try to promote this through the centre, by being the CMI member, there is that opportunity to request a mentor or to request a business contact that could be CEO to CEO. I've done it. I've had some success from it. I noticed actually a comment there from Walter May about Global Welsh is soon to look to start doing this as well. So it's interesting that there's lots of little pockets that are having similar ideas, and maybe there is a need for us all to collaborate as well to escalate this, because collaboration is so important in business.
Yeah, it kind of just into simple signposts, doesn't it? This is where I go, and then I can access all these amazing things. Yeah.
I think just on that network point, and Walter, I'm sure in the lobby, saying, just give a little bit of a plug for Global Welsh. Connecting to people who've got that experience, who've been on that journey, who want to help you is really important. And I think Global Welsh have done a fantastic job of creating a network of very successful business people that span the world. And sometimes, again, it comes back to that sort of personality and humility. Sometimes people are a little bit reluctant to ask. They think that if they're asking a question, they might seem to be stupid, but that's not the case. And certainly the network within Global Welsh are ready to help you. They want to have those conversations with those young businesses and those people within Wales, and having somebody who's been through the same process that you're about to go through, have worked in the sector that you're trying to deliver a product into or a service into, who have been successful, there is nothing more powerful than learning from those kinds of people. And I think it sort of ties up everything that both Sally, Dylan, and we've been saying, networking, and in a way that creates synergy, right? In a way that, 1 + 1 doesn't equal 2, 1 + 1 equals 3, right? Because you bring people together to create more than the sum of the parts. So Global Welsh is a great place for that warm network. Yeah.
It is, and actually what happens, I think there's an element of, for an entrepreneur, a little bit of imposter syndrome, that they really look up to and admire these people and almost afraid to ask, and I was there a long time ago, whether it's because I work in L&D, perhaps I am a little bit more curious, and I will approach people and say, will you help, would you be a speaker on my programs, because I'm really passionate in my business about diversity of thought. I don't think it's good to have one trainer standing in front of you in a training program. I think you need a multitude of perspectives and ideas, and that's what I promote through my business. But actually, every time I've approached, Richard, you were really generous with your time when we had a premier tier. You shared your background of your businesses, and I learned from you. Dylan, again, you were really generous with your time. We met, we had a coffee, and I think it goes back to what we said earlier, that asking the questions, Richard, that you said at the start of the session, being brave and reaching out to these people and saying, I'm struggling. Can I take some advice from you? Have you been through this? I think, Richard, you said fail fast, and actually you can almost avoid some of the failing fast by learning by somebody else who's failed fast first.
Mm-hmm. And I think as well, when we talk about growth earlier on, and why don't we have these, these fast growing companies that, achieve sort of, global recognition? There's a certain aspect of culture, right? And I think it expands, beyond Wales even. If you think about the US, in the US, entrepreneurs are almost expected in some ways to have a failed business, under them before they go on and create, a successful one. I think there's generally, an outdated view that, if you fail, then you failed, and don't try again. But that's just not the way it is anymore. Be happy, be ready to fail fast. All right, you learn from a failure, all right, and that's the important thing to take from it.
It's a brilliant point, and I think again, it doesn't really matter whether we're talking about business or school or whatever stage in your life, really, isn't it? It's that ability to think that it doesn't end here. There's other paths ahead, and just keeping going. It's that resilience area that we talked about, I think, on a previous panel. Now, I'm just conscious we're going to try something now which we haven't done before, so we'll see if this works or not. So it may fail, but we don't worry about that. We're going to try and create a word cloud. So we're going to ask the audience what sorts of things. So just think of a word or a couple of words that would give you the courage to really start this process, to go get funding. So what would give you the courage to do it?
Kath, I think it'd be helpful if Sima could share the link here.
Yeah, it's on the
Pole EV events.
If you can see the ticker run there, it's on the bottom of the ticker run. So www.poleev.com/CI events. So if you're on live, please go here and put your words in. So Neil's come up in the chat with coffee. So yeah, that's definitely something which can help creative thinking late at night. Have we got any responses yet? Again, it may be the system as well, because we haven't done this one before. So we'll see if it works. If it doesn't, we'll capture the results and create a word cloud later. We'll just give it a couple of more seconds. Bravery. There we are.
Yeah.
What else? Desperate. Okay. Need. Oh, here we go. It's all loading up now. Here we go. So we've got desperate, challenge, solid, business, curiosity. I love the way this word cloud is developing. This is great. I'm hoping that my colleagues that are hosting the event in the background can almost keep this going, actually, so we can start to build it up over time. So what other things gives you that courage? So for me, for example, I take great courage from what Richard was saying about failure, and not being held back by that, letting that sort of give you wings versus stopping you from doing things.
Can I make a point, maybe a more practical point that you'd expect from academic? Yeah. And I had to deal with this recently. Is that, but the stats show that 85% of business people don't change their bank; they stick for the same bank. I had a terrible experience with my bank over the last 4 weeks, where I was locked out of my business account, and I couldn't pay suppliers. And it was a nightmare. They were the worst customer service I've ever had. So, they basically said I had to sign on to telephone banking to get onto my online account. But then they were asking me questions about my online account to get into telephone banking. And I was trying to explain this really doesn't work. And it took me 3 weeks. And in the end, I managed to get in. But this, I think, is really key. And the business, like I said, I'm currently chairman of, we had to go from funder to funder to funder to funder. And despite us knowing we were going to be successful, despite us believing that we had a strong business plan, despite everything that you talk about here, belief, ideas, inspiration, we got turned down by DevBank, for example. We got turned down by 2 other funders. And in the end, we found a bank that really, truly reflected our philosophy as a business, and we reflected theirs, and it was a specialist bank, and they have been absolutely fantastic.
Yeah.
And they've given us the funding. I mean, we have the funding in place, don't get me wrong. You know, everything was fine. The problem is, if you, as Richard probably knows more than anybody else, you just need that capital in place when you need to expand, so you don't get your bucket of funding and you might go overdrawn. You know, you just need to be safe because you're not too sure. And we got that in place. But I'll tell you, you know, that took a lot of hard work, a lot of homework, and getting that right. So when we talk about not necessarily the courage stance for funding, it's actually going out there and saying, well, if you're not happy with your bank, why are you staying with them? You know, why not look for other options, particularly now with, you know, digital banking becoming far more prevalent and a lot of new challenger banks in the place. So don't stick to that one bank that you've been with for, in my case, 15 years. And I thought everything was fine because the challenge didn't come. But when it did, they failed miserably. And I will not be staying with that bank after this year.
Well, I mean, very valuable advice. And I think the very practical advice, again, about talking to your solicitors, talking to your lawyers, talking to your resources you already have around you, in order to just point you in those right directions and take you to the next step. And I think, you know, the thing I've learned from this session, from all of you actually, is just the sheer wealth of resources that there are out there. You know, it's just tapping into them, isn't it? It's finding those connections. Now,
And also, Pat, I think it's levelling up. As an individual, you have to level up. You have to believe in yourself as a business owner, have that self-belief. And that's what I've taken from both Dylan and Richard today, is about you can do this. You really can. You've been brave enough to go to that level. Go to the next level. Go and ask those next questions, you know, and surround yourself by people who know more than you do.
Yeah. And again, oh, sorry, Richard, go for it.
Sorry, I was just aware there's only a few minutes. So I wanted to get the last point in, and that sort of draws all that together as well, I think. You know, the decisions that you make at the very early part of your early stages of your business are really critical. All right. You know, if you make a decision about an investor that isn't the right fit for you, you know, that can have, you know, significant consequences as you move forward. I've been very fortunate in my career in both instances where I've raised financing through equity. The equity providers are actually customers of mine. All right. So these were people who I'd sold to, who understood the value I was providing and believed in the product. Now, you know, the other end of the spectrum is equity providers who will, you know, very heavily leverage the arrangement in their favor because, you know, they want to minimize their risk, right? And perhaps they're passive and perhaps, you know, they're not really that engaged with you or don't understand your sector. So, you know, decisions that you make at the very early stage of your business are absolutely critical. You know, take your time over them, talk to people about them, and make sure you make those right decisions because they can be, you know, an anchor around you as you move forward. Otherwise.
And can I build on that?
Yep.
Can I just add to that? It's over the last 12 months, I've had about 6 or 7 businesses just contact me out of the blue. I think mainly because obviously I was doing some work on finance before, and they were telling me about an investor that had come in, and it had been an absolute disaster for so many reasons. But essentially, the investor had come in, and it's essentially it was like a cuckoo in the nest. They'd come in and try to throw the founder out, and for so many reasons, it was just, as Richard said, it was such a wrong fit. And, you know, some of those founders were young people. They were naive. They didn't know what they were doing. They signed definitely the wrong contracts. And this whole point of advice is really important. And, you know, it broke my heart to see that these people had worked so hard to get the business to a stage where it's investable. And then somebody comes in with a bit of cash, and all of a sudden, you know, they're the expert on that business, and they don't consider what that person has done. And I think that is really important, is that investor founder fit from day one. Yeah. Don't take the first money on the table. And that is a problem in Wales because there are few angel investors in Wales. So you tend to go, oh, I'll go with those people. No, it has to be the right fit, because if it's not the right fit, you're going to face trouble down the line. And when that happens, you may, as some of these people have, lose your business. And that's not the situation you want to be in.
Very good advice. I'm just conscious of time, and I've got one last question I really want to ask all three of you. So if you can really shortly, basically this is a challenge question now. So if you were to be able to challenge the Senedd about anything that we've talked about today and say, look, just do this, and this is going to make the biggest impact, what would you be asking of them to consider now? So Dylan, I'll start with you.
Simple. Integrate entrepreneurship into every economic policy that you have and make it a 15-year plan, not, as what normally happens with politicians, a 5-year electoral cycle plan.
Yeah. Thank you.
For me, I think try to build a broader understanding of the sectors that you want to support, so that you can have a more balanced assessment of risk and reward. And you can bring in, subject matter experts to help you do this. My understanding is that there's a lot of risk adversity. There's an issue with money, all right? They're not. There seems to be an issue with invested in companies that can't absolutely show the matrix that's going to give them a return, right? The spirit, have a broader spirit of entrepreneurialism within government, I think would be my point.
Okay, so actually very similar to Dylan, really focus on entrepreneurship everywhere. Yeah. Okay, great. Sally?
Mine's probably very similar, to be honest, and a little bit specific to the sector I work in, is more recognition of leadership skills and effective leadership skills. One of the reasons I sit alongside you on the board, Kath, at CMI Cymru, is that we understand the accidental manager, and I think we've spoken so much about that today. Entrepreneur, that transition into then managing people. I would like to see the Welsh Government promote the value of leadership skills and not just the focus on STEM subjects, because leadership skills enable those STEM subjects to come alive. It's such an enabler. So, and also learner-led more.
Mm-hmm. But really, just to wrap up, I just want to say thank you very much for very active and interesting participation. I've learned tons on the course of the last hour, so thank you. I think, again, I mean, to sum up, it feels like you're all very optimistic. There's so much opportunity out there. And if anything else, if we can just hook people up together, get things connected, and really shine a light on entrepreneurship and the leadership and management skills that can unlock that, then, we've got a great future in Wales ahead of us. So thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So that's it for today's session. Thank you to everyone who joined us, and thank you, Kath, Richard, Sally and Dylan, for your insights and expertise. Don't forget that if you're a member of CMI, you can log into Management Direct using the link in the live chat. If you're not a member of the CMI and would like to join our community, there's more information in the live chat. And for more information about the CMI Wales board, you can visit the board's webpage by clicking on the link in the live chat. So thank you again for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.